So I'll just start recording now. Okay, so the first thing that I would like us to discuss is what is a challenging conversation for you and why do we need to have them? So to do this, I am going to try my first technological trick and share a electronic whiteboard with you. So that should be presenting now. Can you all see the whiteboard?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, great.
It's disabled on a mobile app. I'm watching this through my iPad.
Okay, so you're not able to type into that, Azim?
No, and I don't think I can type into the chat either. I've been trying to, and it's not letting me.
Okay, so you're going to have to just speak up.
Okay.
So yeah, on this, it'd be useful just to hear, like, what are your own ideas about what a challenging conversation is for you? Because I think that's different things for different people. And then why do we need to have them? So I've put my suggestions in there for like what makes conversations difficult for me, and they are often conversations where I might be talking about an insecurity, or they might reveal an insecurity in me, or where I'm really not sure about how the other person is going to react, so I avoid the situation at all costs. But yeah, if we just spend a couple of minutes to type in there or share out loud. Can everyone see how to type on it, type in it even?
I can't see it at all.
You can't see it at all, okay. So Adam, the two questions are, like, what is a challenging conversation for you? So what is it that makes difficult conversations difficult for you? And then why do we need to have them? So we can just like talk out loud about it.
Okay. I think I'm similar to you in that it's always things where you're uncertain how either, the other person's going to react, or if it might have repercussions for how you're perceived, be it by that person or an organisation.
Yeah.
So at the minute, I'm kind of thinking, do I want to stay in teaching or not? And I don't really want to have that conversation with anyone at school because it might mean them thinking that I'm not as committed to my job or something like that.
Okay, so it's when like fundamental questions about your identity or how you're perceived are kind of a threat. And like, why, in your opinion, do those conversations need to be had even though they're uncomfortable?
Because ultimately I'll have to make a decision, and usually with these difficult conversations, a decision does have to be reached, and you're better off having the information and other people having the information than suddenly being presented with something at the end of it that might not necessarily be to the best for everyone.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. So thanks for people who are sharing on the board. I'm just going to read some of them out loud for the benefit of people who can't see. So we've got a conversation where I could be seen in a poor way, usually with senior members of staff. A conversation where somebody can say no. One where you come from a position of weakness, e.g. challenging a head of department as an NQT. So I think that's a really interesting one where like the power imbalance is there, so you don't necessarily feel on a level footing to have a difficult conversation with someone. And conversations which challenge something that has been said or done. I'm not sure who wrote that one and if they'd like to reveal a bit more about it.
Yeah, it was me. It's quite similar to the one above. I did have my head of department in mind, and it is, when you have to challenge something that you being an NQT is difficult because maybe it's not been done to other members of staff, but it's kind of seen as, oh, you're an NQT, that's kind of okay.
Right, okay. And then the last one we've got is a conversation that's not productive and leads to insecurities and overreaction. So hopefully in today's call we're going to establish ways to have conversations where it doesn't lead to overreaction and insecurities, but I can totally empathise with those fears and the reasons they might be the reasons why you don't want to have a difficult conversation in the first place. So I'm just going to stop sharing that slide and return to the PowerPoint. Okay, So, challenging conversations, like definitely covered by all of your comments, are those conversations where like the content is difficult to talk about. And also they're the conversations where people often don't say the things that they're really thinking and feeling, and that's what makes them difficult. Like they often address, I always use an iceberg analogy for all situations in life, and I think difficult conversations often become difficult because we only really discuss the surface level issues and don't actually discuss the root cause, which is where like the problem quite often stems from. And I think that can be for numerous reasons, but I mean, speaking personally, like speaking about my feelings and how things have personally impacted on me when in a professional context isn't something that comes as easy to me as it does in like my personal life, for example. But it's really important that we address what is leading to a situation that has arisen anyway, because that's where we can find the answer to preventing it happening in the first place. Rahila, I don't know if you've got anything to add there. Not sure if Rahila's still there. Has anyone got anything to add there? No, Rahila, we can't hear you. I've just seen your message on the chat. I don't know if your mic is muted or... Not to worry. We'll carry on without you, and hopefully your mic will sort itself out. So that's what a challenging conversation is, and we're going to have a look now at Jack's story. Did everyone manage to have a read of that before they attended today, or would it be helpful for me to provide a summary?
I was able to read it.
You were able to read it? Has everyone else been able to read it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a no in there? It's fine if there was. Okay, I'm going to assume everyone read it. So this conversation is a difficult conversation because Jack and Michael both don't really express what was going on, like beneath the surface level situation. So if there's anyone there that didn't read the conversation, basically Jack and Michael are friends. Michael asks Jack to do a professional favour, and then Jack does it for him. Michael isn't happy about the standard of it, and expresses this in a not particularly helpful way. And instead of Jack talking about the way that this has made him feel, he just does the request anyway and ends up feeling resentful and frustrated, and his relationship with his friend and professional colleague is damaged as a result. So through not talking about how he's feeling, he's not got the outcome that he wanted from that. Like that situation could either present itself again, or he might think, I'm never going to help him out ever again, and his friendship could be like damaged for a long time as a result of it. So this isn't like a uncommon scenario. There's often a gap when we're talking about difficult things, like between what has happened and the reasons why it has happened in the first place. And that's what this session should help to open up a little bit more and give us the structures to help us actually dig a little bit deeper. So I'm going to share now a link to a survey, and I would like to hear from you on what are the things which make having difficult conversations difficult for you. So I'm just going to share it in the chat. And if you click on that link, it should take you to a survey.
I don't think my chat function is working properly. Can you potentially just email that to me and I can fill it in on my phone?
Yeah, I can. I'll do that for you now.
Thank you.
Are you on your work email, Adam?
My phone email is just adam.blackburn1@outlook.com. It'll come straight up on my phone rather than me having to try and get onto the school thing.
adam.blackburn1@outlook.com, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Right. I've just emailed that through to you now.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think most people have started to respond to that now. So we've got some varied results which you should all be able to see on the screen. Would anyone like to provide a little bit more context about what makes challenging conversations challenging for them?
Sorry, Amela, are they meant to be on the PowerPoint on the main screen?
You should be able to see now a screen with the survey results on there. Are you not able to see that?
I'll just do it. I'll just do it quickly again and see if it comes up.
I can't see the results. Amela, are you displaying the results on your screen?
I've put them on now, I think. Can you
Okay,
see
yeah, it's loading.
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Have you got them now?
Brilliant. Can you see it now?
Great. Okay, so yeah, I was just asking the question if anyone would like to provide a bit more context about what makes difficult conversations challenging for them.
For me, I think it's just that I never know what the outcome is going to be, and you don't want to have, well, I personally never want to have a challenging conversation if I think that that's going to impact me later on, or if there'll be like a pushback almost. So that, and I don't really know how to go about having them, I suppose, in that way.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
To add on to that, I always tend to second guess myself and think, do I actually know enough about this to be raising this issue? Especially with teaching, I'm still sort of, like someone said before, being an NQT, and I feel like even if it's a legitimate thing that I'm concerned about, I still feel almost like a novice bringing it up.
Yeah. Anyone else share those feelings?
I think the whole, not feeling like you have the experience or knowledge to say something's definitely something I'd agree with. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, the response to all of those barriers would be slightly different, but I think what's important in terms of like the issue that you raised then about not feeling 100% sure about what you're presenting, like having a difficult conversation isn't about being right or winning or like presenting fact. It's about sharing your perspective and your understanding and your experience of the situation and being open to hearing somebody else's. And I think the key is when you're presenting the content of, you know, whatever issue it is that you want to raise, that you really believe that that's the way in which, you know, you believe in, that you want to find out more about it and you don't believe that you are right about it. Like, go in with that kind of curious and exploratory approach, and invite the other person to share their perspective as well. I think lots of the barriers that we experience with it. So for me, not liking confrontation and not knowing how the conversation will go, like getting flustered and my mind going blank in the moment. Unfortunately, I don't think these anxieties about having difficult conversations can disappear completely. And as we said at the beginning of the conversation, at the beginning of the webinar, difficult conversations need to be had because they're the ones that bring about change. So avoiding them isn't the answer. But I think the good news is that through raising our awareness about what the barriers are and working through them and then preparing for having the conversation can make you feel a lot more equipped than you otherwise would. And practice through having difficult conversations with people, like the more you do it, the easier it gets. So in this call, we're going to look through like models for that and also work through these barriers as we go. But awareness and preparing, I would say, the two key things to make you feel in a more empowered position to have a difficult conversation, and also to have that kind of exploratory, curious and open-minded approach, and that like your way of seeing things might not be reality and it might not be 100% fact, but you're there to find out more about someone else's perspective and to share yours as well. Have I missed anything from that, Rahila? We can't hear you again. You've disappeared again. Okay, not to worry. Okay, so I'm just popping the PowerPoint back up now, which you should be able to see. Can everyone see that okay? Okay, so yeah, this is just summarising what I was said. So yeah, the fear and anxiety will always be there around having them, but through practicing, through preparing for our conversations, and through like working through our fears around it, I think quite often our fears and like the emotions associated with having difficult conversations don't reflect the reality of having them. So it's unlikely that as a result of a conversation you're going to get sacked, dumped or damaged beyond repair. But quite often when we're in these situations that we're not comfortable in and we're not used to being in, then we can be irrational when we're thinking about, okay, what could actually happen in this scenario? And I think that's where, through actually working through like your preparation for having a difficult conversation, thinking about the questions that you're going to ask, thinking about the way you're going to frame things, can take away some of that kind of not irrational fear, like it's real fear, but can kind of keep you more grounded in the reality of what the situation is. Any comments on that? Okay, so we're going to move on now to introduce Douglas Stone's work. So Douglas Stone has done some work on having difficult conversations, and he's a managing partner at Triad Consulting Group, and he's also a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, where he teaches negotiation. And he wrote this book called Difficult Conversations, which I would highly recommend reading. It's kind of a dip in and dip out of it book. Really interesting. It provides really good scenarios, really good tips for overcoming anxieties around it, and just like really practical tools, so like opening lines that you can use to introduce a difficult conversation, etc. So I'd highly recommend the read. I'm going to provide kind of a high-level summary of what he suggests is the right approach to having difficult conversations in this PowerPoint, but yeah, hopefully you will go away and explore it a bit more. So he talks about any conversation really actually being 3 conversations. So he talks about the what happened conversation, and this is the topic of the conversation that like is usually shared. So like, what is the conversation about, like the topic? Then there's the feeling conversation, which is sometimes shared and sometimes not. So what is the impact this is having on you? And this is the one that, again, for me personally, is avoided in a professional context quite a lot, but it's also where the root of a problem often is. So if you just think about classroom-based examples, if a pupil is misbehaving and you just respond to the pupil who's misbehaving without actually exploring like how are they feeling, what's contributing to this, like what impact is it having on the person, then it's almost like diagnosing, prescribing before you've diagnosed. You can't actually address an issue if you don't understand where it's coming from. So that's the feelings bit of the conversation. And then there's the identity conversation, which is the bit, Adam, I think you were drawing on at the beginning. So if I have this conversation, is this going to change the way people think about me? Or if I have this conversation, is it consistent with my way of who, like my like reflection of who I am? So before the call, I asked you to think about a difficult conversation that you either need to have or have had and hasn't gone well. And it would be useful now for you to just think about how does that conversation break down into these three categories. So an example I've got was my partner had to give some feedback to somebody at work. So the what happened conversation was this person was kind of presenting quite negatively in meetings, like slouching, not really contributing, only kind of doing minimum tasks. So that was the what happened. The feelings conversation, from my partner's point of view, that he felt let down, he felt like the person wasn't like particularly motivated or like respecting him, and he was feeling quite exasperated by it and getting a pressure from above to address the issues. He was feeling stressed. And then the identity conversation was quite interesting when we spoke about it. He said that as a boss, he likes to be seen as kind of friendly and approachable and not kind of authoritarian in the way he manages people. And he was worried that through having this difficult conversation with a friend and colleague, that might change the person's perspective of him. So through working through those three things, he was able to raise his awareness around like what the real barrier was to him having that difficult conversation and then working through that. Has anyone like been able to think and reflect about their situation and how it fits into those three categories?
I can share an example as well for me. I had a situation where I was a team leader on a project, and an incident had happened early on in the project, which between two of the team members, and at the time we thought it had been resolved, but actually it hadn't been resolved, and that resulted in another incident, which on the surface had seemed like a minor thing, but actually then escalated because these two people hadn't had a conversation to discuss their feelings behind it. And so I guess there's two layers there. I had to then have a difficult conversation with the two individuals. And the two individuals had to have difficult conversations with each other to resolve the issue. And for me, what was difficult about that in terms of the identity is these two individuals were a lot older than me. And so in some ways, I kind of felt a little bit insecure about having to confront them about this issue. And as a team leader, I was afraid about how I would come across and whether, whether I'd come across as like someone who's really credible and whether they would actually take me seriously. But in the end, the conversation went fine. But yeah, those were the three kind of layers to that particular situation.
Thanks for sharing. Anyone else been able to kind of reflect and break down their conversation into those three levels? Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So on the next page, this is talking about how before we actually go and have difficult conversations, we need to reframe the way that we think about them and actually rename them. So as I mentioned before, having a difficult conversation is not about going in to win a court case, like to prove you're right, to like make a case, win, really let off some steam. Like that's not what it's about. They're exploratory conversations to help you understand and hear other people's perspectives and to share your own in order to get a positive outcome. And I think through reframing it in that way, it can take a lot of the heat out of the situation. Like you're not going in to prove a point and worry that your point isn't articulate enough or you don't know enough about it. You're not going in to like really deliver a hard message to somebody. You're just going in to raise awareness of an issue that's happening and explore together ways forward and how you can address it. So like Douglas Stone says that we should think of difficult conversations as being learning conversations. So they're like an exploratory and collaborative space. So when thinking about the three elements of a conversation, which is really useful in preparing for having a difficult conversation, but also when you're having a difficult conversation, you should think about it in these ways. So when you're thinking about the what happened bit, think about the facts that have happened and avoid behavioural conclusions. Avoid words like always and never. You're just stating like the thing that's happened. Consider when you're preparing for your conversation, like your intent and your contribution. Like what has your past experience, have your past experiences contributed to you feeling the way that you're feeling at the moment? Enter the conversation with a spirit of curiosity to hear about other people's perspectives. And definitely consider like how the what happened might look like for the other person, but also like do that with flexibility as well. So avoid assuming people's thoughts or assuming people's interpretations of things, because quite often they're not the same as what ours are. So I think it's useful to consider someone else's point of view, but not be inflexible about it. And then in the feelings bit, it's really important not to avoid them in your preparation for having a difficult conversation and in the conversation itself, because it's often where the cause of the issue is. And if that isn't named, then the solution that is created is not going to address the real issue. It's only going to address like the surface level, the task, the surface level thing which has happened, not the thing which is going to prevent it happening again. And then the identity bit, consider this before you have a conversation and think about how this might be impacting, and share this when appropriate with in the conversation with other people. So before we go into a model for having difficult conversations, I think it's also important to raise this issue of whether we should be having them or not in the first place. And unfortunately, this is a human topic and a personalities thing, and it's not possible just to have a prescriptive list of does it meet this criteria? Yes, you should have a difficult conversation or not. But I think it can be helpful to work through these points to make you feel more comfortable with the decision that you come to around whether or not you want to raise an issue. So firstly, work through those three conversations. So the what happened, the feeling, and the identity questions, particularly considering the distinction between what has actually happened and what do you think has happened. So really distinguishing fact from, not invention, but fact from the assumptions that we can sometimes make about a situation when we're feeling emotional about it. Then it's super important to consider, is this conflict something that's really within you? And this is an example that I was thinking of recently. So you feel like you're working harder than anyone in your team. Rahila, no, I'm only joking. So you feel like you're working harder than anyone in your team. And then when you get to the identity bit of the conversation, you realise that actually, being efficient and organised and on top of things is a really strong bit of your identity. And for that reason, you don't really ask for help for things, you take ownership over tasks quite a lot. And as a result, you're doing quite a lot of work. But that situation is actually stemming from you and not from the other person. So I think working through this can help you get closer to a conclusion about whether it's actually something that needs to be discussed, or is it something that you need to go away and reflect on first and work through before you decide whether having a difficult conversation or a learning conversation is the right next step. And then finally, consider if you have the time to have the conversation. And I'm definitely guilty of this. You need to, if there is an issue that is constantly there, you need to make the time to have a conversation about it at a planned time, in a time when you're in the emotional and mental place to have that conversation, and when the other person is as well, or don't have the conversation at all. So quite often, I think frustrations can come out through actions or like snappy replies to emails or text messages. And all this does is either exacerbate the situation or create a real sense of negativity and tension. And whereas if the issue is actually raised, then you're more likely to get to a more meaningful solution. Any comments on that, on working through having a difficult conversation? Okay, so we're now going to move on to actually having the difficult conversation. And this is broken down into 3 different steps. So first of all, your own mindset, next preparing for the conversation, and then finally actually having the conversation. So the first thing goes back to what Douglas Stone was saying about having a learning conversation rather than a difficult conversation. So resetting your mindset, like believing that you are not right, like you might have strong feelings and a strong opinion or a strong sense about how a situation is going, but that is not fact or right. That is just your view of the world in that particular situation. Be curious to find out about the other person's perspective and want to listen and be open. If you're not there yet, if you're feeling so angry about something or so upset about something that actually you're unable to consider things from someone else's perspective, then maybe you want to hold off until you feel like you can get to a place where you are able to do that. I think there's very few situations where like one person is right and the other person is wrong. There's normally lots of shades of grey within there, or misunderstandings or missed information, which is why the conversation is difficult in the first place. So like resetting and check that you are actually in like a healthy place to have that conversation. You've got the right mindset. Then doing your homework. And your homework in terms of having difficult conversations, and this is the bit I think which can really help to reduce some of the fear and anxiety about having difficult conversations. So firstly, work through the 3 steps. So the what happened conversation. So considering like what is your story and perception of what's happened. Considering where it's come from. So have your past experiences contributed to this? Considering what your intention was, considering what the impact of the situation has been on you, and really thinking about what you have contributed to the issue. And then considering that from the other person's perspective as well, like what could their perspective be? What could their past experiences be that have led them to act in this way? What could the impact have been on them, and what could they have contributed to the situation? But note that I'm using the word could there because we can't really know what other people's intentions are, but it's definitely worth considering that to try and get you into more of a neutral place. Then the feeling conversation, so what feelings are underlying the judgment, both for you, and what are the feelings that could be underlying the other person's actions. And then the identity conversation. So what's at stake for you in relation to your sense of self and identity? Has the situation threatened your identity in any way? And what could these things be bringing to the situation, and are they helpful? Sometimes through working through those 3 things, we can come to the conclusion that actually having a difficult conversation isn't the best course of action here. It would be better for me to try X, Y, and Z first. Sometimes through working through those 3 things, it can just make you feel more connected to the reality of a situation and take away the fear around having the conversation. So either way, it's useful to work through it so that you're in a much more level position to then go and have the conversation. Any questions on that? Okay. Then deciding if you want to raise the issue or not. So is a conversation the best way to address it? And then planning the conversation. So that goes back to the bit I was saying before about if there is an issue there and it's not going away, it's worth having a conversation about it. And the situation and the person and you owe yourself like the respect to actually have that conversation, make the time for it. And yeah, not let it come out through you not showing the best version of yourself, through maybe getting exasperated with the situation and not being brave enough to actually raise the issue. And then we're going to look to the actual model of having the difficult conversation. So that's all the kind of pre-work and thinking and self-reflection, which is really useful to do before you have a difficult conversation. And which again are the bits for me which reduce some of the fear and the anxiety. Like I will practice having the conversation out loud, I will write a script, I will think about what my points are, I might share that with a colleague or share that with a friend and check that I'm not presenting things in a way that's like just from my perspective or I'm bringing too much opinion into it and not sticking to the facts, etc. That can make me feel much more prepared and calm for having a difficult conversation. Has anyone got anything to add on into those bits about how they might prepare for having difficult conversations or things which they think might be useful from that?
I agree with you on that. I think for me as well, difficult conversations definitely make me feel very anxious. And so what helps me to feel more confident with them is just thinking it through, taking that time to plan it out, rehearsing it in my head, just so that I'm mentally in that zone to be able to approach someone and have that conversation, and kind of psych myself up for it. And having that practice beforehand definitely helps.
Yeah.
And also anticipating their responses and knowing then, okay, if this is how I think they might respond, how will I then respond to that? So I think planning is really key there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think when you start to think about people's responses, that can start to eliminate some of the fear, because I think some of the responses that we might imagine, like at the thought of having the conversation, when we actually start to work through it, become like a lot more reasonable and manageable. Is this something that people do before they have difficult conversations, or do you just not have them at all? And for this, like think about in a professional and non-professional context. I'm sure we've all had difficult conversations in our relationships or in our friendships. Is actually preparing for the conversation something that you do, and do you find it helpful?
I wouldn't say I prepare in like as many words as that. I wouldn't think it through to the same extent, but I definitely try and think through what do I want out of this talk, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how does that work for you?
I just basically try and think, what do I want to get out of having this talk, be it, as you said, in a relationship or otherwise, and think about what do I need to do to try and get that outcome or an outcome that's just as good. And usually it's don't get the other person's back up straight off the bat by being a know-it-all.
Yeah. And do you find that like doing that prep work helps you in the conversation?
Yeah, I think so. It helps me keep my mind focused on, what I actually want rather than what I feel like I want to do in that given moment, which might be, make a snarky remark or be a bit self-righteous or something like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. Anyone else? Or anyone who doesn't prepare and thinks that that's the best approach? Okay, so we'll move into the actual having the conversation. And again, like I said at the beginning of the session, this is a suggested structure, which you may take some ideas from, you may not go away and follow it step by step. So the first thing is about stating the facts, so stating the what happened in the third person. So that doesn't mean kind of grammatically in the third person, like one thinks this, but more the third person in terms of it being neutral territory. So like imagine you're a family mediator and there's a husband and wife who've got divorced and you're the person that needs to enhance communication between those two people. So it's not about presenting your view of the world. It's about stating something that's happened in a neutral way and opening up a dialogue about discussing it. So I've put a scenario on there. So how might we turn this scenario into the third person? All your contributions to collaborative planning are rubbish and clearly rushed. How could we frame that in more of a third person or neutral way? Daniel, any suggestions on how we might reframe that?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean by in the third person. Really, you could always turn it around to say, talk about the issues that are caused when people rush collaborative planning. So when people rush their collaborative planning, it impacts on everybody.
Yeah, so that definitely takes some of the heat out of it. Any other suggestions for how we might reframe it, Lauren?
I know this is something that I definitely struggle with, just going in with that idea, that sense. Particularly, I always, throughout this whole thing, I've just been thinking of my head of department. So, yeah, that's what I've been thinking of mainly.
Yeah. So I think like the key here, like when you're like starting in the third person, it means just naming the topic without having an opinion or a judgment on it. So you might say, for example, I've noticed that our approach to collaborative planning is different, and I was wondering if we'd be able to talk about it to figure out a way forward that works for both of us. So through saying that, you're not saying that I think that you're wrong and I'm right, and like automatically changing the balance on the scales. You're just like stating the issue. So say, for example, you're super tidy and your boyfriend's a nightmare and they never do the dishes. You might say, I've noticed that our approach to tidiness in the house is different, not you're really messy and I do all the housework, because that's only going to result in the other person defending themselves. All you're doing is like almost just like naming the topic of the conversation, so bringing it to the table. And at this point, because you've thought about your mindset before you've gone into the call, before you've gone into the conversation, you're not thinking like I'm right, they're wrong. If you're really entering the conversation with a spirit of curiosity about it, like this is how I'm really feeling about this situation, but it might not be what's actually happening, then you know, like that will come across anyway. So it's about like just presenting things in a bit more of a neutral way. Does that explain the third person thing? It's probably like the wrong phrase, just like in a neutral way. Does that make more sense, Neil?
Being more passive about it rather than, you know, directing it at somebody.
Yeah, more passive about it. So you're just like naming the topic, and that it would be great to discuss it a little bit more.
Yeah, so you're just kind of like identifying the facts of the situation. But there's no, I think that the language that you use is very important here, because you also don't want it to kind of be leading in any way or like suggestive or have like an undertone to it. So it's just simply stating a fact, you know, like Amel said, I noticed that whatever it is that you've noticed, can we talk about that? I noticed you've been arriving late to work the last week. Could we have a chat about that?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Rahila. So in the situation with my partner and his colleague at work, he opened that conversation with, I've noticed that you've not been contributing much in team meetings recently. Not, you never contribute in team meetings and you're not putting any effort into your work, which is all the things that he was kind of feeling over a cup of tea with me behind closed doors. But that's not what he took to the situation, because he thought it through, and we really spoke about the importance of considering like what are the possible things which could be causing someone to act in a way like to be unmotivated or to present in an unenthusiastic way. And there's numerous things that could be behind that. So it could be that they're unmotivated and they're lazy, or it could be actually they've got things going on at home which are impacting at work, or it could be that they're not feeling motivated because they don't feel challenged. So we actually don't know the reason why a situation is the way that it is. So that's why we don't open conversations with that assumption already made, because it's probably not the case. Whatever we think it is probably not the full story. So opening up the conversation in that way. And then stating your intention. So stating really clearly what you want to get out of the conversation. So you want to hear and understand their perspective on the situation, and you want to share yours and help them to understand yours, and you want to find solutions together. So your intention, which you may completely leave out of a conversation normally, but it's obviously not to win or to get your own way. When you leave that difficult conversation, you want both parties to feel okay. You want to feel that you've been able to speak about how you feel, and you'd like to feel that the issue has been addressed. And that can only be done through hearing both sides of the story. And then the next bit is the importance of hearing other people's perspectives. And here comes in the importance of listening to understand. How familiar are we with good listening skills? Is this something that you've covered before in other training? Or what are the characteristics of good listening from your understanding? Adina, any ideas?
I find, if I can chime in, sorry, I find eye contact really important. I think that just tells me that I know someone's listening and understanding. I just see it as something that's quite polite as well, almost. Maybe it's just that was something that my mum always said to me growing up.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, eye contact shows that someone is actually with you and in the room. Any other features of good listening?
To kind of build on the eye contact thing, just speaker support, generally just nodding your head, saying, that sort of thing as people are talking, so that they actually realise you're listening to them, can be really important. It's why we find Skype so difficult, I think, is we don't get that same speaker support. I'm not getting anyone at this moment in time going, that sort of thing, while I'm speaking. Yeah. It feels like I'm talking too long.
Yeah, so you can't read those signals.
Yeah.
And anything else on what good listening looks like?
Also, I'm quite small, so when I'm talking to someone and we're both standing up, I think people tend to, when you're small, and tend to almost get closer to you and really look down almost, and I find that a bit awkward in a way. So I appreciate someone who just understands that sort of physical distance almost as well. And I know it's something so subtle, I only probably notice it, and I only do with certain people, but when I do it's I can really notice it.
Yeah, well, I'm the opposite end of the spectrum because I'm really tall, so I'm the same. I like to be sat down when I'm speaking to people about things where it just feels uncomfortable. So yeah, definitely agree with you on that. So going in depth into what good listening skills are and how we can practice them is really the remit of another session. But the things which you've shared absolutely fit the criteria of what good listening looks like. And other things which might fall in there are asking open-ended questions, paraphrasing, so checking that you have understood what they have said correctly, acknowledging people's feelings when you're listening to them. But yeah, this is all criteria which needs to kind of come with authenticity. You need to actually want to understand the other person's point of view and want to hear their perspective. And if that's not the case, regardless of how good your questioning skills are or your body language is, then that will really come across. So it goes back to that bit at the beginning about really being committed to, okay, this is their time in the conversation. I am going to really try and understand this from their perspective, because you're going to get your time. And this is really important because if people don't feel heard, they're not going to be able to hear you. So you really need to do that. We're going to do a bit of a role play now, which comes from Douglas Stone's book. And this exemplifies, I think, what I mean about listening to understand and not to reply. So, Rahila, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
We can hear you. Okay. So this is a conversation between Greta and her mum, and I'll read a little bit of an introduction, and then Rahila are going to role play version 1 of the story. So I'm Greta, Rahila, and your mum.
Okay.
A year ago, Greta's mother learned that she had diabetes and was ordered to follow a strict regime of medication, diet, and exercise. Greta's concerned that her mother is not following the regime, but Greta has had little success in encouraging her mother to do so. A typical conversation between them goes like this. Mum, you need to stay on the exercise plan. I worry that you don't understand how important it is.
Greta, please stop hounding me about this. You don't understand. I'm doing the best I can.
Mum, I do understand. I know that exercise can be difficult, but I want you to stay well. I want you to be around for your grandchildren.
Greta, I really don't like these conversations. It's all very hard for me, the diet, the exercise.
I know it's hard. Exercising is no fun. But the thing is, after a week or two, it gets easier, you start to look forward to it, and we can find some sort of activity that you'll really enjoy.
You don't realize it's very stressful. I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. That's all there is to it.
So that's version 1 of the conversation. So not surprisingly, these conversations leaving Greta feeling frustrated, powerless, and deeply sad. Greta wonders how she might be more assertive and how she can persuade her mother to change. But assertiveness is not Greta's problem. What's missing is her stance in curiosity. In a follow-up conversation, Greta shifts her goal from persuasion to learning. To do this, she limits herself to listening, asking questions, and acknowledging her mother's feelings. So this is version 2. Greta, I know you don't like talking about your diabetes and exercising.
I really don't. It's very upsetting to me.
When you say it's upsetting, what do you mean? In what ways?
Greta, the whole thing. Do you think it's fun for me?
No, Mum. I know it's really hard. I just don't know much about what you think about it, what it means to you, or what you feel about it.
I'll tell you. If your father were alive, it would be different. He was so sweet when I would get sick. Having to follow all these complicated rules, that's what he would have been good at. He would have taken care of the whole thing. Being sick, it just makes me miss him so much.
It sounds like you've really been feeling lonely without Dad.
I have friends, and you've been wonderful, but it's not the same as having your father here to help. I suppose I really do feel lonely, but I hate to talk about that. I don't want to be a burden on you kids.
You feel like if you tell us you're lonely, it'll be a burden, or that we'll worry?
I just don't want you to have to go through what my mother went through. You know, her mother died of diabetes.
I didn't know. Wow.
It's scary to be told you have what your grandmother died of. It's hard for me to accept. I know the medications are better now, which is why I should be following all those rules. But if I follow all those rules, it just makes me feel like some sick old lady.
So keeping to the regime would feel like accepting something that you don't really totally accept yet.
It's irrational. I'm not saying it's not. It's just very frightening and overwhelming.
I know it is, Mum.
I'll tell you something else. I don't even understand what I'm supposed to be doing. The eating, the exercise. If you do one, it affects the other, and you have to keep track. It's complicated, and the doctor isn't terribly helpful in explaining it. I don't know where to begin. Your father would know.
Maybe that's something I could help you with.
Greta, I don't want to be a burden.
I want to help. It would actually make me feel better and not so powerless.
If you could, that would be a big load off my mind.
Okay, so that's the end of version 2. What were the key differences in those two conversations? Feel free to type if you don't want to speak up.
I think you came across as if you wanted to understand her point of view more, and you kind of you learnt things as well from it that you didn't already know.
Yeah, exactly. So in that second conversation, Greta is not assuming what is leading to certain things for a mum. So when a mum says that she's upset and she finds something upsetting, she doesn't think, oh, I know what upsetting is. I know that emotion. I know what that feels like for me. She says, what is it that's upsetting about it? And through actually being curious and genuinely wanting to understand the situation from a mum's point of view, she has realizations and she finds out new information, which have all been contributing to her mum not wanting to go to the gym and eat healthy, that she would otherwise never have known. So I think that conversation really exemplifies quite clearly that difference between skating along like the surface level issue to actually exploring, oh, like this is happening, let's try and find out why it's happening, and let's really try and understand it from the other person's perspective before a solution has come to. So in option 1, she's like dragging her mum along to the gym, and in option 2, she's actually helping her mum with the thing which she needs help with, which is figuring out how to manage the medication and the exercise and making it a bit clearer for her. So that's what we mean by good listening. So being really committed to wanting to understand something from someone else's point of view and not listening to answer. And like listening to respond is the way that we operate in most situations when we're listening. Like listening to understand is a skill and requires you to really like silence your own mind and to silence your own thinking and assumptions about what might be behind things and being curious.
And actually another difference, I guess, in the second conversation is that if you notice, the questions were a lot more open and exploratory rather than leading or suggestive in any way. And she was also acknowledging what her mother was saying.
Yeah. And through acknowledging, so through like paraphrasing and repeating things back to people, they know that you've heard. So just like you were saying before about eye contact and body language, they're all signals that you are with that person and you're really listening to them. You're not just glazing over thinking, yeah, when's it my turn? You're actually with them and really understanding and checking that you're with them on that. And then once they feel heard, then it's your turn to be able to share your perspective on it. So your story, when you're thinking about your story, you definitely need to start from the point where you believe that you are entitled and you can bring up any issue that you want to bring up, even if, like some of us said earlier on, we're not the expert in that situation. Like your opinion matters, and that's what you're going to raise, not in a loaded way, but like how you feel is real and needs to be shared. And also like reminding yourself that people can't guess how you're feeling about things. Like you need to say it. And again, thinking about personal experiences, I often assume like, oh, it's obvious that I would have been feeling stressed, or it's obvious that would have upset me. And then when I've actually asked the other person, they've thought, no, like I thought that this, or you really didn't come across in that way. So I think we, especially with people that we know or we're close to or colleagues that we work with, we might assume quite a lot of understanding that isn't there. So I think being committed to actually saying difficult things is number one. In order to like harbour understanding between you. Avoid easing in. So if you've got an issue, then address it head on. Like don't kind of warm up to it. Just say what the issue is, and share where your conclusions come from. So you're sharing some of your story, like these are the things which could have contributed to me thinking like this. So you're sharing your inner dialogue, you're sharing those 3 conversations with the person. And avoid exaggerating. So we were saying before about always and never, like try and keep in that kind of neutral language. And like help the other person to understand you. So you might use metaphors that they understand, or you might ask them to paraphrase back for you. Like, would you mind like just summarising what your understanding of my perspective is, so I can check that I've explained it clearly enough. So yeah, like using the same approach that you would use when listening to them, like encourage them to use those techniques as well. And then once both stories have been shared, that's when you move into the kind of problem solving and looking forward part of the conversation. Now, you may not be saying it, but you may be thinking, oh yeah, this is like a PowerPoint, people don't respond in that way. And that is absolutely true, that not everybody goes into difficult conversations, either in work or at home, with this mindset, and they haven't done all of that thinking before, or emotions just take over and they can't present things from like a rational standpoint or be curious. So you need to be prepared for that, and that goes back to what Rahila was saying before about preempting potential responses. So the first thing it says on there is like connect and redirect. So what this means is if someone comes out and says something like you're the nastiest person on the planet, then hear what they've said and then try and move it on. So I can hear that you're still sounding frustrating about this. Can you tell me more about that? So allow them to say more, like kind of name the thing that they've said and move the conversation on to you understanding more. Because usually if people are still feeling frustrated about something, it's because they've not yet said their piece. So if in doubt, go back to listening, go back to inviting them to shed their views on things and to explain their feelings and where they're coming from. That is really important. And then name the dynamic if it's not working. So if, for example, you're having a difficult conversation with someone and you feel that the volume is rising and they're getting exacerbated and it isn't moving in a productive direction, then name that that's happening. Like, I've noticed that our voices are raising quite a lot here. Is there something that I'm not hearing? Or is it another way that we could approach this? Again, just like checking that the other person, like what is it they're trying to communicate through getting heated about it. Yeah, any other thoughts on that, Rahila or anybody else?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you there. Like when you're in the moment and say you don't have time to plan for a difficult conversation, you're just in a situation, maybe you're talking to your head of department or your mentor, and maybe they're getting angry or frustrated about something. That's still an opportunity for you to step in and still be quite neutral and just say, look, I'm sensing that you're a bit frustrated at the moment. Would you like to talk about it, or what's going on there? And just kind of open up that space to discuss it further.
Yeah. I also think as well, like reflecting yourself in the situation. Like, remember my line manager gave me this line of like, my response is not appropriate at the moment, but like being aware of that in yourself. Like if you're not actually, if like a situation does catch you on the spot, like Rahila said, like you weren't planning on having this conversation and it arises and you're feeling like angry emotions and that you're not actually going to present your side of things in the best way, then name that and reschedule. Like, I would really like to discuss this with you further, but I'm not feeling in the right mindset to discuss it now. Could we talk about it at X time? So a good example of this might be feedback. You might not, after a lesson, you may not be in the right frame of mind to be getting difficult feedback. And it's important for both of you that both people are in the right headspace to have that conversation in order for it to have an impact. So like being aware of others' emotions and being self-aware as well. Like, is there anything that here actually isn't that helpful? So that's the kind of model that you would follow. So starting in the third person from a neutral territory, like exploratory and with curiosity, stating what you want to get out of the conversation, spending time fully understanding the other person's perspective, sharing your story, and then moving forward into the problem solving with an awareness that it might not be that smooth, and have kind of strategies for how you're going to respond to those different things. Are there any questions about that model or any reflections on it? Okay, so it's 7:10 now. We were going to have a bit of open space for us to kind of share our thinkings on this. So if we just have a quick minute of that. So I guess what I'd be keen to hear is have you found this useful, and what are your key takeaways going to be from this session?
I think for me, just the idea of actually planning out the conversation properly. Obviously I've thought about it in my head before, but never in this kind of structured way. I think that's probably what I'm going to take away.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam.
I'm probably going to take away the curiosity aspect. So going in wanting to understand the other person's point of view and perspective, rather than going in almost feeling a little bit sort of one-sided and thinking this is what I want out of it. So going in understanding that I need to see the both points of views.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so the last thing we're not going to do, because we're running out of time, but the last activity was going to be for you to share a commitment about what you're going to do in relation to this topic. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because having difficult conversations is unpleasant, and most of the time people walk around avoiding having them, myself included. And it's really important that you have them, because these conversations are the ones which will actually bring about long-term positive change. So again, speaking about my line manager, whenever I have a difficult conversation to have, I will always tell her, because I know she will make me do it. At that point, she will say, right, when are you going to have the conversation? Let's prepare it together, and when are you going to feedback? And through having that there, I know that I've got to have the difficult conversation, and I'm not going to run around avoiding it. And avoiding these things is what makes them more difficult. But the more that you do it, the easier it does get. And I think, approaching them through a learning conversations perspective and being curious creates just a lot more of a low stakes environment, which is more likely to result in a positive outcome for both of you. So in this session, there hasn't been the chance to actually talk through individual situations. However, LDOs would be really happy to work with you one-to-one on this. This is part of your leadership development, which is relevant for having difficult conversations with mentors, colleagues, and in other professional and personal environments. So we'd be absolutely committed to helping you with this if this is something you think it'd be helpful for you. Following on from the session, I'll send through the slides through the PowerPoint, and I'm also going to send through a handout which has got kind of prompt questions for yourself and questions you might want to ask to other people, just to support you in preparing for and getting into the right mindset for having a difficult conversation. Post work is challenge yourself, make sure that you do it, or at least take your thinking one step forward in relation to having difficult conversations. And then if you're interested in this topic, then I'd really encourage you to explore Douglas Stone's book to find out how Jack resolved his issue with Michael, but also just to really embed this learning and hear more about the different strategies that you can use in having difficult conversations. So, just in the last minute, a quick reminder about half-term 2 deadlines, because I know some of you won't be seeing your LDO face-to-face this half-term. So the deadline this month is the 15th of December for your objectives and journal reflection. And then other things going on, just to be aware of, are the Big Class Challenge, the Innovation Series, and the Christmas Socials. If you want to find out more detail about those, then they are in the bulletin, but please sign up soon for one of the socials, because the sign up is in a couple of weeks' time. Following this, I'll send out the handouts and we'll also send out a feedback sheet. It would be great to hear how you found this session and whether you found it helpful, and if not, what changes could be made going forward. But other than that, unless anyone's got any questions and they want to stay on the call, then thank you very much for joining.
Can I just add, if anyone's joined, whoever it is that's joined by phone, if you could just drop us an email so we know that you were with us.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rahila. Okay, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.